Welcome back to the summer season, your English country beer garden of review shows. This episode we pay tribute to one of the greats with a look at one of his less talked about films. Knights, Bikes and Tom Savini in a codpiece. Yep, George Romero's Knight Riders. A troupe of themed stunt riders travel the open roads and put on medieval games, but to the king, this isn't just a play, it's a way of life. The modern-day knights in their community of partners and support staff face curious audiences and aggravation from the local authorities. But where some of them are pragmatic about the difficulties they face, Billy, the king, is unyielding in his position of fairness and honour. But their way of life isn't only challenged by the bully cops. With the challenges to his leadership, there are pressures from the modern world. And for Morgan, the Black Knight, the quest for the crown is being frustrated by the status quo, and as fame and riches beckon, the temptations of fracturing the community. Honour and loyalty are noble things, but are they outdated and outmoded ideals in the modern world in which this last reflection of the old ways fights to exist?
In cases like this, the king, Sir William, can judge a victor or call for another pass. Now, in the case of another pass, the knights may not use their lances, but must turn to hand weapons.
Neither man was the clear victor. Fight again, Sir Knights. Morgan had the advantage, so Sir Kay will choose. Mounted or hack, Sir Kay?
Hacks.
It's something that could sound pretty bad on paper. Knights on bikes. I mean, how cheesy is that going to be? Knight Riders certainly feels that way from the opening shot, where we see a self-flagellating medieval type in a scene that could have easily been lifted from any number of similar films of the time. Only this time the nobleman steps onto a different kind of steed. A Honda CBX. Nice. It's a beautifully jarring moment, a clash of worlds and expectations. King Billy, played by a brand spanking new Ed Harris in full dignity overdrive mode, is a seriously old-fashioned kind of guy. The community, his kingdom, is not just a performance for him, it's his world, his life, and he'll fight for it tooth and nail at the expense of everything else.
What's your problem, magician?
It's, same old thing, you know.
We properly got a permit to use the field, and it was signed by the sheriff of
The
Bakersfield.
deputy doesn't want to know about the sheriff. He wants his own little paycheck, so he says he'll shut down the tournament. Tuck, what's the gate today?
We're not paying.
Oh, come on, Billy. What do you think you're gonna do?
I'm gonna say no, that's all. We're not paying. It's wrong to pay this guy off. It's wrong, Morgan!
We don't need any hassles. We're talking about serious hassles here.
I don't think this guy's gonna do anything. He's not gonna shut us down. He's not gonna do shit. Come on, let's start the games.
And so we see the central character's strength and his weakness. King Billy is a character who we can love and feel disappointed with at the same time. He's intensely proud and admirable in his conviction to his code, but it's obvious that he's a character that's out of step with the modern world. And it's clear that it's a world that he rejects. It's one that's superficial and shallow. His world is idealistic, noble and righteous, but in the face of a modern world, he's fighting for something that fits like a glove, only it's on his foot. Funny enough, it's not the invading gangs that spur the company's collapse. Being in the modern world, it's become impossible for them to survive without bowing to the new king. Money. And obviously, Billy isn't all that sold on that idea. When a promoter tries to offer them a deal, Billy is disgusted, but as the rest of the company points out, they're barely holding on due to costs. Their existence, of course, costs money in this day and age. It's no longer enough to live by the code. They have to adapt to face their most persistent enemy, the modern world. Morgan splits with the group, taking a few of his men under the promise of fame and fortune. But what they find is, vacuous experience that leaves them without pride or the meaning that they had. It's worth discussing Morgan here. As the company's bad guy, he cuts an ambitious figure, a swaggering, lustful, old-school adversary. But not a bad man. He's led astray, lured by the trappings of celebrity, but he quickly comes to realise what he's left behind. He returns not with resentment, but humbled and recognising his place in this world. He's played to perfection by the legendary FX artist Tom Savini, who really shows his acting chops at their best here. He's a very charming and lovable rogue who, you know that once the end credits roll, will lead the troupe forward with the spirit that Billy brought to the table. Only hopefully with the kind of life that Billy was losing from the opening frame of the film. Knight Riders isn't a maudlin tale though, as much as it laments the loss of the past, or at least the sensibilities of that past. As sad as it is, its end is genuinely an emotional conclusion, but there is hope for the future as the past is laid to rest. It is for me the most emotionally involving in the body of films of Romero's. It's genuine and moving. George Romero's signature social commentary is in full force in this film, and Knight Riders is actually one of the most poignant and heartfelt works in his filmography. The knight and Arthurian imagery could have been left more intact than it is. They could have had horses, for instance. But Romero chose to use motorcycles. Even with this, the vestige of a past time, the modern world intrudes. But this they have embraced, they've made it their own. It lends the thought that they can adjust further if needs be. Having the story as a clash of two period mentalities lends a comparison between nobility and reality as we know it. It uses it to discuss the modern world, to show the kind of integrity that we would like to see. But it's not unsympathetic to those who understand that it is something that struggles to exist in its old and pure form today. Just as the king must die to make way for the new world, the ethos will live on, evolved and true to the spirit of the community. Morgan's revelation about what the bright and shiny baubles of fame in the modern world means brings him humiliation and humility, while Billy comes to learn that his ways will die out if he doesn't adapt. Romero takes us to the only conclusion that is realistic and satisfactory, and that the troupe changes just enough to continue to exist, but at the cost of a little compromise. This is something that Billy can't do. Billy makes a sacrifice and departs the group in order to tie up some loose ends, and then he rides until he falls. It's a tragic, though fitting end for the man who represents the past. He dies, but he inspires. He lives on in the spirit of the group that he guided and that he formed. I can't honestly see a more fitting example of self-reflection in George Romero's entire works. It's not a leap to compare the thoughts and feelings of this movie to the big man's career. His small independent company, his close group of friends that he worked with, the challenges of making works that were outside of the commercial sphere, and the balancing act of art versus commercial demands. When he made Day of the Dead, he was faced with the decision of making a commercial film with a relatively big budget, or making the film that he wanted with a significantly lower budget. And he chose the latter, cutting down the film to fit the money available, but not compromising on the aesthetic of what he presented. When I watch Knight Riders, I see a film that reflects Romero's situation throughout his career, constantly fighting for survival, trying to be true to his vision, and the frustration that can be found in the pressures of modern-day commercialism and financial demands. Intentional or not, Romero seemed to invest a lot of himself in this beautiful story. As strong a film as this is, it never really made it big even among Romero's fans. In the minds of the fans, it tends to sit lower on the lists when you ask them what their favourite film of George Romero's is. Eclipsed by the spectacular zombie films, less visually appealing than the likes of Martin, and quirkier than Two Evil Eyes or Monkey Shines, Knight Riders is something that many fans sort of stumble across at a later date, hidden in the shadow of Romero's more celebrated stuff. But it's a film that clearly has all the love in the world poured into it. It's a distilled nostalgia and a refined drama, in a way that Romero was rarely allowed to do. It's a better film than most mainstream efforts by some margin, though its genre feel and odd premise well, that wasn't likely to make it a draw in the general public's eyes. Some great performances, in particular Tom Savini and Ed Harris, really elevate this film. Harris specifically cuts a very interesting and conflicted character that's the linchpin to the heart of the movie, and one which Savini plays off to for great effect. The mystical and spiritual elements of the film are a little confused, but it certainly doesn't trip the film up. That aspect of the film is very much a nod towards Arthurian legend and goes on to tie it into American history, especially with the mysterious Native American rider. Merlin also helps relocate the story, helping it survive the leap across the pond, but it can feel a little out of place unless you take the film to be Billy's point of view specifically, in which case we can cut it a bit more slack. Being Billy's POV, we're subject to a lot of his fantasies, his hopes, his literal dreams. Whatever way you look at it, it's all a bit skimmed over though, and it does little more than to nudge Billy in a direction. It lends a bit more of a sense of fatalism and spiritualism, which is uniquely Billy, but on the whole, it adds little more than a bit of texture to the film, largely because it's a character trait and not actually what the film is about. What Knight Riders is very strong at, though, is involving us with the various characters, whose extraordinary lives are peppered with very ordinary problems, and the conflict between how they want to live their lives and the modern demands that grate against their choices, which are very down to earth. Romero plays the community's internal struggles in a Matryoshka doll fashion, a microcosm within a microcosm almost. Alan finds a girl from outside the group and struggles to make her part of it. Morgan, like a frustrated child, rebels against Billy and behaves like he's the most important thing around. And Pippin is confronted with his sexuality by Angie, who, ironically, has her own issues with that.
Get out of this alive, will you be my lover?
Yes!
Well, we just married on radio.
These things threaten to tear the group apart, but in one of Romero's more optimistic stories, they manage to pull back from the brink of self-destruction. Optimistic is probably one of the best ways to describe Knight Riders. Despite its sad ending, it doesn't feel like it's the end of it all. The group is somehow stronger after their loss, and Billy's reign will clearly become the stuff of legend within their community. The troubles they have will be resolved, and they're actually closer than they've ever been, at least within the course of the film. Knight Riders isn't the showiest of Romero's film. It isn't the one that breaks new ground. It isn't the one that yells for attention. But it feels to me like it's the one that gave Romero the chance to tell a more personal story, and that actually shows through in the strong emotional tones that the film carries. It will likely never be the first one that folks think about when they think about Romero, but it is the one that demonstrates Romero's storytelling techniques and skills rather well, without the trappings of his zombie pictures. It should be said that the stunt riding is outstanding, and the imagery really does suspend you between the two worlds of the ancient and the modern rather nicely. It has just enough self-indulgence to let you know that the cast and the director are having fun while it's not being obnoxious by any stretch, and what we have is a film that serves up a good-natured and often exciting spectacle, with a very well-fulfilled story that feels fun when it can, and serious and purposeful overall. It's tempting to let the oddities of this film's slightly odd imagery, mentioning no codpiece Savini's, persuade you that this film is a silly piece of whimsical entertainment. And it's true that Knight Riders does have more than a little of that to offer, but honestly, this is one piece of Romero's work that really moves me on a level other than horror. I love this film, And it's a truly underrated piece from one of the most influential directors in the history of horror. See you, George. And thanks for everything.